Before viewing this presentation, it is recommended that you first watch the previous segments of this series entitled The Brotherhood of the Snake and Sun Worship. In the beginning, when the environment was suitable, the earth must have been a barren tundra, a wasteland, and for the first time the sun rose in the east, giving birth to this new world. The process of photosynthesis began as vegetation sprung up and began to grow and bear its various fruits. As the sun sank deeper into the afternoon, we saw the emergence of animal life, birds, and we could hear the birds singing, and we can see the animals. And then we can see primitive man in the form of an ape, mingling amongst the animals, neither harming the other, living in a state of innocence. And you saw man only eating plants and roots. You saw that even when the animals and man were in competition for food, no one was injured or hurt. But there was a display of waving of arms and yelling and grunting until one or the other moved away. The significance of this is the age of innocence, when man lived in the Garden of Eden. Innocent. With the animals, he was a vegetarian. And as the sun progressed farther towards the west, we saw man begin to retreat into the womb or the shelter of a cave inside Mother Earth. For the darkness and uncertainty was upon him. For you see, the passage of the sun across the sky, from the time that it rose in the east, signifying the birth of the world, we saw that as it reached its zenith, its most powerful aspect in the heavens, life began to emerge, first in the form of plants and then animal life, and that the animals and early man lived in harmony together, in a state of innocence. The world had been created, plants and animals had been created, and primitive man now existed on Earth. It takes many years of study to understand what I am imparting to you. You would watch as the apes milled about in great excitement, and one encouraged by another, signifying Adam and Eve. The one encouraging was the symbol of Eve, and the one being encouraged was Adam, until he actually reached out and partook of the apple of knowledge, and he was imparted with intellect. And then the other apes began to eat of the apple. Now, many people that I know attributed what happened to some extraterrestrial force, and they were receiving the exoteric interpretation, or that which is meant for the profane. If you've been following this series, that is, those who are not illuminated and cannot understand what it is they are seeing. But for the initiated, what you are witnessing is the creation of the world by God and the impartation of knowledge to man, the forbidden knowledge, by the serpent, Lucifer, through his agent, Satan. For in the religion of the mystery schools, they believe that man was held prisoner in the Garden of Eden by an unjust and vindictive God, and that man was not told by this unjust and vindictive God that he could have had the same powers as God. And man was set free from the bonds of ignorance by Lucifer through his agent, Satan. And many believe that the two are the same, and that's okay, because maybe they are. And that through the gift of intellect, man himself will become God. Now, for those of you who understand what I am imparting to you now, you may not even have to listen any further, for it explains everything that has ever happened in the history of man, and everything that is happening now, and all that is to happen in the future. As it progressed, you would have saw the first primitive man form the first original thought with the use of the gift of intellect. For you see, that monkey who sat there squatting on his haunches in the desert, striking the earth and the pile of bones with this great thigh bone, was the first priest of the mystery schools. And it was this first priest who then began to initiate others into the secrets. And they are the ones who have been responsible, according to my research, for most of the scientific developments and the forward movement as far as material progress goes of the human race. For they were the learners. They were the ones who developed science. They were the ones who hid their developments and used their science and their knowledge and their secrets to govern others. Usually not as kings, but as advisors and as priests and, in all actuality, the powers behind the thrones in ancient times, and even today. They have ruled from the shadows, you see, and they have called themselves the guardians of the secret of the ages. And their first religion was called Astrotheology, or the worship of the heavens. And their first object of worship was the sun. And everywhere you see these mystery schools, or the mystery religion, you will see the symbols of the sun and the moon, also known as Osiris, and then his wife, Isis, and the child Horus, which I'll explain the meaning of later. And I would challenge one to examine some of the great theories, like the Pythagorean mathematical theory, or some of the greatest literary works, like Homer's Iliad, or great inventions, like electricity, and many, many others, or the most influential leaders. And research who the leader is or was, and who the person behind the invention or theory is or was. And you'll most likely find, if you've sifted through the information properly, that they almost all are or were Mystery Babylon initiates, or at least agents thereof. Man's newfound intellect set him upon a quest that, according to those who say that they know, has never ended, even until this day. And the modern day equivalent of this ancient mystery religion calls itself the Order of the Quest. And you will see it reflected in many of their outward exoteric branches, where they disseminate information to the public, or manipulate the public, or deceive the public, as the profane to them are nothing more than cattle to be herded, and occasionally to be led to the slaughter. Now, all of this that I thought I knew so well and understood has become even more mysterious to me, and I still do not know the answers, but I have an awful lot of clues and a lot of facts, and I have learned an awful lot. And maybe I am more confused than I ever was in my entire life. But after you hear the results of what I have learned, maybe all of us being confused together can put the pieces into places and patch this mystery together and come up with what we need as answers to formulate a future that we can all enjoy, without fear, without wars, without lies and deception and manipulation, without elitists and terrorists, crooks and liars. For I am going to continue to impart to you during all of this that the priests of the ancient mystery religion are the ones who have caused most of the misery in the history of man. And if they have not learned this knowledge, the secrets of the ages that they keep from the rest of us and use to manipulate us, maybe, just maybe, we'd have reached peace in this world hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands. I don't really know the answer to that, but I don't think much of what has happened in the history of the world that was miserable or terrible would have happened without these people. But I may be wrong, and as always, when you listen to people, including me, don't believe a word you hear unless you can substantiate it in your own research. These priests want the world to soon make a transition into their one-world utopia. Now, I don't know whether it will be or not, but I can tell you this. The priests of the ancient mystery religions are in charge right now, and we had better damn well find out, and we'd better do it very quickly, for the new age is the age of Aquarius, and just like they did when Pisces began, they will make their transition. Let's go back now to the beginning, when man was in his infancy on the evolutionary scale of development. Man was alone. Alone in the sense that he did not have all of this help and the knowledge that we have today that enables us to survive. You see, man was then subject to the cold, to the wild beasts of prey. He didn't have a home, he didn't have air conditioning in the summer, didn't have heating in the winter, he didn't have medical doctors. If he became ill or injured, he was most likely to die. So, it did not take ancient man very long to decide that, in this world, the single greatest enemy to be feared was the darkness of the night, and all the unknown dangers that came with it. And simply stated, man's first enemy was darkness. This scene is the beginning, the origin, the history, the dogma, and the identity of the ancient mystery religions, which are now known as the mystery schools, the Order of the Quest, Freemasonry, the Ancient Order of the Rose and Cross, the Knights Templar, the Sovereign and Military Order of the Knights of Malta, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, the Priory de Zion, the Toul Society, or sometimes known as the Thule Society, the Order, the Skull and Bones, the Russell Trust, the Jason Society, the Scroll and Key, the Illuminati, and we could go on and on and on. But the most important thing to realize is that they all have been collectively known throughout the ages as the mystery schools. The Illuminati, which literally means illumined ones, international socialism, communism, they are all one and the same, as you will come to know. And you will understand perfectly how they've been able to infiltrate all of our society and culture. What you hear does not necessarily reflect my views or my beliefs or religion. We have to begin in the beginning with every story and every history. And we have to begin at the beginning of mankind. And the beginning is the beginning according to the mysteries. Reading from The Future of Man, written by Robert Clark. They believe that the tree-dwelling ancestors of man were among the most intelligent beings of their distant age. And when these creatures finally abandoned the trees and walked fully upright, freeing their hands to serve as implements of their minds, as well as their bodies, there began the most successful evolutionary drive toward higher intelligence ever witnessed in nature. As ground dwellers, these creatures were easy victims of the great predators who hunted them down by day and surprised them at night, as they huddled in clearings and caves. They could not compete in strength, ferocity, or speed with their attackers. Armed with little except their hands and what their complex brains enabled them to do with those hands, they had to think or die. For untold thousands of years, most of them met early violent deaths. Only a few in each generation had the good fortune and the ability to outwit their enemies. And these favored ones survived long enough to have and rear offspring. The unwary, or the stupid, died early. And folks, I'm afraid that the stupid who live today are going to die early too. But back to the beginning. Their offspring, if they had any, were left to starve or be eaten by predators. Natural selection was operating on the earliest types of man with grimmest intensity. Perhaps no other extant creature was undergone so severe and protracted a period of selective elimination. Yet here and there, small groups managed to survive because they had the intelligence to use sticks, stones, and clubs to defend themselves. Crude and puny as these implements were, they were weapons, and their possessors were the first creatures who could kill without having to come in direct contact with their antagonists. Reading from Norman J. Bernal's Man's Emerging Mind. Quote, as the great beasts grew larger and either faster or more formidable, man became ever more watchful, ever more successful in pitting his wits against mass and power, more and more adept at slipping out of trouble. And as the challenge grew greater, so did his brain, for the laggards on both sides got left behind in the race for the future. Unquote. Many edible nuts are too hard for even a caveman to crack between his teeth. Accordingly, they were useless to early man until some genius of his day discovered that any nut could be opened if it were just placed upon one stone and struck hard with another. Better fed, the family of this innovator proliferated while the others died off. Perhaps centuries later, while a man sat cracking nuts between two stones, one stone broke and the broken edge cut his hand. Previously, men in the same situation had thrown the broken stone away and nursed their cuts. But this man started thinking. He possessed an original thought. Since the edge had cut through his skin and drawn blood, it might also cut through the skin of the small animals he caught, making it easier to get all the meat. The first knife was invented. He, and those close to him, and those intelligent enough to imitate him, increased in number, and the rest died off. They had a cutting tool which made it possible for them to skin and eat meat in less time, so they had more time for hunting. Many of the descendants of this exceptional man became increasingly skillful at breaking and chipping hard stones into sharper tools and weapons. And if you've been to a museum of natural history and you've seen these fine, beautiful flint arrowheads and spearheads, then you know that it took patience and great skill. And this means a further development of the human mind. Natural selection, favoring better knife makers, went on for hundreds of thousands of years. A great many centuries later, a young father foraging for his brood may have come upon a long straight stick, splintered at one end. He pulled and chewed at the splinters until only one stout point was left. Or at least that's how we can imagine that it was done. It seems to him a very useful stick, for it was sharper than the digging sticks which the women used. He may have remembered a night during his boyhood when a great cat had charged his family's campsite and dragged away a younger sister. Now that he had small children of his own, the memory of that attack was ever present. Lately, he had seen fresh panther tracks. Another family, not far away, had been attacked and the mother had been killed. His dawning intelligence told him his pointed stick might be a better weapon against big cats than the clubs which he and the other men carried. So for many days he kept the long stick near him, even when he was laughed at for having what was regarded as a woman's tool. Not only did he possess a greater intellect than his fellow man, but he possessed more courage to resist their laughter. Then one night he heard a faint rustling. He whispered a quick warning to his family. Suddenly, a dim shape charged at him in the darkness. Kneeling, he raised the point of his long stick towards the beast. It sprang, clawed at him savagely, then fled. The creature had struck the point so hard that the blunt end of the stick was shoved deep into the ground. The next morning, following a trail of blood, the man found a panther dead from a punctured chest. The long, sharp stick had saved his life and the lives of his family members. In the same situation, less prospective men, armed only with clubs, would have been killed. From that time, he, his sons, and their sons, carrying impaled weapons whenever big predators were near. Foresight, genetically transmitted to their descendants, had given them a new weapon, which they used with devastating effect against their natural enemies. Perhaps many generations later, a bright descendant of the inventor of the impaling stick mated with the daughter of a man who had thought of throwing a club at fruits, nuts, and small animals on the lower branches of the trees. Now and then this brought down an extra meal. The man who knew how to defend his family from feline prowlers soon learned from this woman the new way to collect additional food. And their young family thrived, and some of the children with good mental inheritance from both sides of the family showed an even higher order of intelligence than either of their parents. With impaling sticks added to their clubs and cutting stones, men no longer had to be such furtive food gatherers. The hunted gradually evolved into hunters. And in times of famine, when battles over food were fierce, those with impaling sticks threw them with deadly accuracy at members of other hunting bands. Sharper stone knives and spears gave a double survival advantage during times of crisis, but the most telling gains were the increasing sharpness of their minds. However incomplete our knowledge of human history, there was scarcely any doubt that the development of brain power or intelligence was the decisive force in the evolutionary process which culminated in the appearance of the species to which we belong. Natural selection, they believe, has brought about the evolutionary trends towards increasing brain power because brain power confirms enormous adaptive advantages on its possessors. It is obviously brain power, not body power, which makes man by far the most successful biological species which living matter has produced. Reading from That Old Time Religion, written by Jordan Maxwell. Quote, "Even the man's new weapons and tools, it did not take him very long to decide that in this world the single greatest enemy to be feared was the darkness of night, and all the unknown dangers that came with it. Simply stated, man's first enemy was darkness." End quote. And with this simple truth understood, we can now begin to unravel the most ancient and still the most successful religion upon the face of this earth. Its success lies in its ability to remain hidden from the rest of the people. The ancient peoples reasoned that no one on earth could ever lay claim of ownership to the great orb of the day. It must belong to the unseen creator of the universe. And it became, figuratively speaking, not man's, but God's son. Truly, God's son was the light of the world. As I stated before, in the dark cold of night, man realized his utter vulnerability to the elements. Each night, mankind was forced to wait for the rising of the sun to chase away the physical and mental insecurity brought on by the darkness. Therefore, the morning sun focused man's attention on heavenly dependence for his frail, short existence on earth, and in doing so, it became the appropriate symbol of divine benevolence from heaven. For without the sun there was no light, there was no warmth, and nothing could grow or live upon the face of this earth. So just as a small fire brought limited light into man's own little world of darkness, likewise the great fire of day served the whole earth with its heavenly presence. For this reason, it was said that the God of the Bible was a consuming fire in heaven. And so he was. It was accepted by all that man was bound to a life on earth, but the sky was the abode of God's Son. He resided up there, in heaven. Ancient man saw in his male offspring his own image and likeness, and his own existence as a father was proved by the person of his son. It was assumed that God's Son was but a visible representative of the unseen Creator in heaven. So it was said, "When you have seen the Son, you have seen the Father." Or said another way, the Father is glorified in his Son. Ancient man, even with his limited intelligence at the time, had no problem understanding that all life on earth depended directly on life-giving energy from the sun. Consequently, all life was lost without the sun. It followed that God's Son was nothing less than man's Savior. Since energy from the sun gave life, and we sustained our very existence by taking energy in from our food, which came directly from God's Son, the sun must give up its life-supporting energy so that we may continue to live. God's Son must give his life for us to live. I know that if you are intelligent out there listening, you are making some connections here. You see, the mystery schools believe that Christianity is a perversion of the mysteries. While it was plainly true that our life came from and was sustained each day by our Savior, God's Son, it was and would be true only as long as the sun would return each morning. And our hope of salvation would be secure only in a risen Savior. For if he did not rise from his grave of darkness, all would be lost. All the world waited for his imminent return each morning. The Father would never leave us at the mercy of this world of darkness. The heavenly promise was surely that he would come again to light our path and save those in the darkness. Logically, even if man himself died, as long as the sun comes up each day, life on earth will continue forever. Therefore, it was said in the ancient text that everlasting life was the gift the Father gives through his Son. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that we may have life everlasting, life on earth. And the ancient text did not mean for you personally, but on earth everlasting life. That is the interpretation of the mystery schools. Since evil and harm lurked at every turn in the fearful dark of the night, all evil or harmful deeds were naturally the works of darkness. And with the return of the sun each morning, man felt more secure in his world and therefore was at peace. Therefore, God's Son was with his warm rays of hope, the great Prince of Peace. And of course, the reverse was equally true. The evil of night was ruled over by none other than the Prince of Darkness. Hence, evil is of the dark, or the devil. It was only a short step to see that the light of God's Son, with righteous and truth, the evil with darkness. From then on, it was simple to understand. Light was good, dark was bad. And the priests of the ancient mystery religion always followed the light. They always looked towards the east. They considered themselves to be illuminated. That being true, then the great orb of day, God's Son, could rightly say of itself that, I am the light and the truth. We should all, in their words, not mine, give thanks to the Father for sending us His Son, spelled S-U-N, in case some of you are getting confused. In every instance where I have mentioned the word Son, it has been in reference to the Son, S-U-N. And it's important that we all understand it, because these are the people in charge. And don't ask me to tell you the truth of religion, for I don't know it. And that we all have a right to worship our own God in our own way, and no one has the right to tell anyone, unless asked, what they should believe. I do not advise you what you should believe or not believe. But I do advise you that we all need to learn as much as we can about everything that we can. Because one thing I have learned in my life is that most of what we have ever been taught has been a lie. And that whoever these people are, and I know who they are, and I will impart that knowledge to you, who are the priests, the adepts, and the initiates of the mystery schools. They are in control, and they are shaping the future, and that future will affect all of us. So we'd better learn as much about them as we can. You cannot identify an enemy unless you know the enemy. You cannot fight a battle if you know nothing about the battle tactics of your enemy. And when you understand that Lucifer is the son of the morning star, or the morning star itself, then the creations of the members of the mystery schools begin to make much more sense. Now, if Lucifer is indeed Satan, how this transformation took place I am not wise enough to know. If they are different, then I have not yet discovered where Satan came from, if Lucifer is not Satan. Now, there are people who have professed to know the answers to these questions, and I have researched their writings for hours, and I still am not sure that they are right or that they are wrong. And I'm still looking for the answer to that question. But I do know this: ancient man witnessed something that he described in his oral history and in his writings. And it could probably be called the first UFO sighting in the history of the world. The following quote will be familiar to you if you've been following this series. Reading from Isaiah 14, verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning star? Now notice, Lucifer was called the son of the morning star. He was also called the morning star. And there is a great mystery here, because Christ also called himself the morning star. I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you the things in the churches. I am the root of the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. Lucifer said that he would return to heaven again to be like the Most High. Again, quote from Isaiah 14, verse 14. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Jesus promised the same thing in John 6, verse 61-62. When Jesus knew in himself that his disciples murmured at it, he said unto them, Doth this offend you? What and if ye shall see the Son of Man ascend up where he was before? So both were in heaven before, both ended up on earth, and both plan on returning back unto their original place. Twins appear in the mythologies of many cultures around the world. In some they are seen as ominous, and in others they are seen as auspicious. Twins in mythology are often cast as two halves of the same whole, sharing a bond deeper than that of ordinary siblings, or seen as a fierce rival. They can represent another aspect of the self, a doppelganger, or a shadow. However, twins can also reflect a complete opposition of the other, such as the civilized Gilgamesh and the wild Enkidu, or in the commonly known instance of good and evil twin identities. Mawu and Lisa, with twins representing the moon and sun, respectively. Apollo and Artemis, god and goddess, children of Zeus and Leto. Romulus and Remus, central characters of Rome's foundation myth, children of Ray Silvia by either the god Mars or by the demigod Hercules. Osiris, Isis's twin and husband, lord of the underworld, firstborn of Jeb and Nut. Arsu and Azizos, gods of the evening star and morning star. Hinduism and Ashvins, sons of the sun god, Surya, represent dualities such as building and destroying. And there's the Jewish Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau. And then there's Horus and Set, although not twins, just brothers. And there's many, many more. In fact, the Latter-day Saints openly consider Jesus and Satan to be brothers. Why do these ancient stories of sun deities all share a theme about twins or brothers? This next part of this presentation could be one or two presentations on its own, so we will just try to be brief and touch upon some of the most important aspects of this legend. This legend of two suns. And, dear listeners, that's suns with a U and not with an O. The age that man later called the Age of Kronos, the name of the Greek god that later became the Roman god Saturn, was remembered with nostalgia as a, quote, age of bliss, unquote. References to the Age of Kronos in ancient lore are numerous. Hesiod tells of a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos when he was reigning in the heaven, and they lived like gods without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil. Miserable age rested not on them. The fruitful earth bare them fruit abundantly and without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands with many good things. Similarly, writes Ovid in the 6th book of his writing called Metamorphoses, quote, "In the beginning was the golden age, when men of their own accord, without threat of punishment, without laws, maintained good faith and did what was right. The earth itself, without compulsion, untouched by the hoe, unfurled by any share, produced all things spontaneously. It was a season of everlasting spring." End quote. Rabbinical sources recount that men lived under very favorable conditions before the deluge, and that these contributed to their sinfulness. Quote, "They knew neither toil nor care, and as a consequence of their extraordinary prosperity, they grew insolent." End quote. The dominance of Saturn at some remote period in the history of the life of the peoples on Earth is documented in almost every culture. According to Morris Jastrow Jr., the Journal of Assyriology and Oriental Archaeology says that the planet Saturn was also designated as Samas, or sun, by the Babylonian Assyrian astrologers, and he quotes the statement of Hyginus to the effect that Saturn was called, quote, "the star of the sun." In these ancient Assyrian texts, they make clear that the sun is Saturn, but also that it reigned at night. Quote, "When Saturn, the sun, stands in the place of the moon, the king of the country will be firm on his throne." End quote. Or, "When the sun stands over the moon, or under the moon, the foundation of the king's throne will be firm." Saturn standing in the halo of the moon, or, "On the 14th day, Saturn stood by the moon," or, "On this night, Saturn approached the moon." Strange as it may seem to us, the planet Saturn appears to have been regarded as the sun of the night. Many traditions persist that at some time in the past the moon was much brighter than it is now, and larger in appearance than the sun. In many rabbinical sources it is stated that the sun and the moon were equally bright at first. The same statement was made to Dishagun by the Aborigines of the New World. Quote, "The sun and the moon had equal light in the past," end quote. At the other end of the world, the Japanese asserted the same. The Nihongi Chronicle says that in the past, quote, "the radiance of the moon was next to that of the sun in splendor." Traditions of many peoples maintain that the moon lost a large part of its light and became much dimmer than it had been in the earlier ages. Saturn is not a conspicuous planet in the sky. Were it not for its sluggish movement, an unaided eye would hardly distinguish it from the surrounding stars. In many ancient sources, Saturn is called Sun. The usual name for Saturn in Chaldean astronomy was Aleph Shamash, meaning star of the sun. Diodorus of Sicily reported that the Chaldeans called Kronos, or Saturn, by the name Helios, or the sun. And he explained that this was because Saturn was the most conspicuous of the planets. Hyginus also wrote that Saturn was called Sol. In the Babylonian astrological text, the word Shamash, or sun, was used to designate Saturn. We learn from the notes written by the astrologers that by the word sun, we must understand the star of the sun, Saturn. Ninib was the Babylonian name for Saturn. Ninib, in various places, is said to shine like the sun. He was known as Utgala, the great son of storms. The Greeks used to call Saturn Phanon, the shining one. The Bhagavad Gita contains the following description of a deity. Quote, "If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the Mighty One, the Shatterer of worlds." End quote. If Saturn was always as inconspicuous as it is at present, what could have caused the races of antiquity, as if by common consent, to give Saturn the adjective sun, or the shining one? The astrologers certainly must have found it increasingly contrary to reason to associate the star that gives us light and life with one of the palest and slowest of the planets. A group of short-period comets carries the name of Saturnian family of comets. They revolve on an ellipsis that approach closely the orbit of Saturn. Russian astronomer K. Vyashkilevsky of the Kiev Observatory, one of the leading authorities on comets, has brought strong arguments to show that the comets of the solar system are very youthful bodies, only a few thousand years old, and that they originate in explosions from the planets, especially from the major planets Saturn and Jupiter, or their moons. He concluded that comets of short duration originated in the solar system were not captured from outside of that system, and that they came into existence by explosions from Jupiter and Saturn. The explosions of cometary bodies from Saturn and Jupiter is claimed on the basis of purely astronomical observations and calculations. The circumstances of such explosions must have been admitted extraordinary. The time when this happened must be measured in thousands of years and not tens of thousands or millions. Many of you are probably making the connections now. Remember what the Masons claimed to have occurred around the year 4000 BC, or AL, the year of light, as they call it? Some nova-like explosion in the sky, confirmed by emissions showing an explosion in the sky around that same time. Let's continue. Following the rabbinical sources which declare that the deluge was created by two comets ejected by the planet Saturn, we begin to understand the astrological texts, such as in a work entitled Speculum Astrology. Juncanus ascribed inundations to the action of Saturn's comets. Also, cuneiform texts contain prophecies of a deluge taking place when a comet assumes a direction with its head towards the earth. Isaiah, in describing the days to come, when great changes in nature will take place, says that the earth will give its increase in abundance, and the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of the 7 days. And the rabbinical tradition relates that for 7 days before the deluge, the people heard a great commotion in the heavens that signified the end of the age. The Talmudic tradition that often reaches much farther into the past than better-known sources like the Book of the Scriptures reveals an important detail in the reading of the 7th chapter of Genesis. The world was in a dazzling light, sevenfold stronger than the light of the sun. The light was so strong and so brilliant, day and night alike, that the sun was entirely overpowered by it." End quote. And in the days of Isaiah, thousands of years later, the memory of the light of the 7 days was vivid in tradition, so much that the prophet could refer to it to describe the solar light of the Messianic age. The light of the 7 days was not of solar origin. So of what origin was it? The light of the 7 days served the population of the world as a warning of some extraordinary events. From time to time, once in a decade or once in a century, a dimly shining or invisible star flares with brilliant light. It may become brighter than any of the fixed stars, or any of the planets in the sky. It may be seen not only in the nocturnal sky, but in some cases in full daylight. It burns for weeks or months, and then loses its brilliance, and finally becomes once more a hardly visible star. Such a blazing star is called a nova. Isaac Newton suggested a collision between two stars as the cause of the formation of a nova. The prevalent view is that a nova results from the interaction of two stars in a binary system when the two members disrupt one another on close approach. In such a case, filaments of the disrupted star are torn out of its body and hurled in great spurts to be absorbed by the companion star. The sudden transfer of matter is thought to set off the star's cataclysmic explosion. Now, I'd like to repeat what Isaac Newton, a well-known mystery school initiate, by the way, had to say one more time. Quote, "The prevalent view is that a nova results from the interaction of two stars in a binary system when the two members disrupt one another on close approach." End quote. I'd like to now bring your attention to this article by Robert Sanders, published by Berkeley News on June 13, 2017, entitled "New Evidence That All Stars Are Born in Pairs." It reads, quote, "Did our sun have a twin when it was born 4.5 million years ago? Almost certainly yes, though not an identical twin. And so did every other sun-like star in the universe, according to an analysis by a theoretical physicist from UC Berkeley and a radio astronomer from the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory at Harvard University." They went on to say that many stars have companions, including our nearest neighbor Alpha Centauri, a triplet system. It goes on to say that astronomers have even searched for a companion to our sun, a star dubbed Nemesis, because it was supposed to have kicked an asteroid into Earth's orbit that collided with our planet. Or maybe Jupiter or Saturn. The article then quotes Stephen Stoller, a UC Berkeley research astronomer, saying, quote, "We are saying yes, there probably was a Nemesis a long time ago." End quote. Nemesis, huh? All that we have considered up to now indicates that Saturn once exploded in a nova-like burst of light. The date of this event I would be hard put to specify even approximately, but possibly it took place about 6,000 years ago. The solar system and beyond were illuminated by the exploded star. And this, dear listeners, may be what the ancient brotherhood witnessed and why they began their calendar at this time, based on this obviously very significant event. Saturn, so active in the cosmic changes, was regarded by all mankind as the supreme god. Peoples that remembered early tragedies enacted in the sky by the heavenly bodies asserted that Jupiter drove Saturn away from its place in the sky. Saturn, or Kronos, occupied the celestial throne. In Greek mythology, Kronos is presented as the father and Zeus as his son, who dethrones him. In Egyptian folklore or religion, the participants of this drama are said to be Osiris or Saturn, as many claim, brother and husband of Isis or Jupiter. Osiris's dominion, or Saturn's dominion, before his murder by Seth, was remembered as a time of bliss. According to the legend, Seth, Osiris's brother, and there's that brother again, killed and dismembered him, whereupon Isis, Osiris's wife, went on a mission to collect his dispersed members, having gathered them and wrapped them together with swathings. She brought Osiris back to life, and there's that rebirth again. The memory of this event was a matter of yearly jubilation among the Egyptians. Osiris, or Saturn, became lord of the netherworld, the land of the dead. The Osirian mysteries, the wailing of Tammuz, all refer to the transformation of Saturn during and following the deluge. Osiris is the planet Saturn, or Kronos of the Greeks, or Tammuz of the Babylonians. The Babylonians called Saturn the star of Tammuz. After the deluge, Saturn was invisible. The sky was covered for a long time by clouds of volcanic dust. And the Egyptians cried for Osiris, and the Babylonians cried for Tammuz. Isis, who is Jupiter, went in search of her husband, and Ishtar, also Jupiter, went to the netherworld to find her husband Tammuz, if you're Babylonian. For a time, Saturn disappeared, driven away by Jupiter, and when it reappeared, it was no longer the same planet. It moved very slowly. The disappearance of the planet Saturn in the netherworld became the theme of many religious observances, compromising liturgies, mystery plays, lamentations, and fasts. When Osiris was seen again in the sky, though greatly diminished, the peoples were frenzied by the return of Osiris from death. Nevertheless, he became king of the netherworld. In the Egyptian way of seeing the celestial drama, Isis, or Jupiter, the spouse of Osiris, or Saturn, wrapped him in swathings. Osiris was known as the Swath, the way the dead came to be dressed for their journey to the world of the dead, over which Osiris reigns. Similar rites were celebrated in honor of Adonis, who died and was resurrected after a stay in the Netherlands, in the mysteries of another mystery school initiate, Orpheus. And we won't go any further into Osiris, as Osiris will be the subject of its own presentation. Saturn exploded and caused the Earth to go through the greatest of its historical catastrophes, and this was completely sufficient to make of Saturn the supreme deity. After the deluge, Saturn, dismembered, almost ceased to exist as a planetary body, and when at length it was reconstituted, it was feathered by rings, and was far from being the dominant celestial body that would behoove it as the supreme deity of the epic. The age of Kronos is so glorious an age that it is hardly thinkable to connect it with the period after the deluge. The wailing for Adonis, Tammuz of the Babylonians, or Osiris of the Egyptians, all deplored the end of Saturn's dominance. Then why was Saturn the supreme deity by whose name this great and glorious age was named? If the distances between the Earth and Saturn were then what they are now, then such occurrences could scarcely be observable. Saturn is clearly visible, but is not for an unaided eye a spectacle in the sky. It was more voluminous and more luminous before the deluge. So, did it move? If such was ever the case, the age of Saturn and the very unusual conditions under which mankind lived in it would gain in meaning. If there is truth in this, that the Earth was once a satellite of Saturn, or of some binary or two-sun system, and if the age of Kronos was a golden age, then it is also proper to assume that the conditions on the satellite Earth were very favorable for life. The geological record documents extreme climates for the past of the Earth, times when corals grew in the Arctic, and times when the Earth, partly even on the equator, was fettered with ice. Such climates on Earth could only be achieved by varying positions of our planet as an astronomical body. Therefore, surmises that have been made here are not in conflict with geological and paleoclimatological records, or the historical record. But in the absence of direct indications, we may only deal with the problem of Earth as a satellite of Saturn as with a hypothetical construction. This hypothesis is called the Saturn Theory. It states that something did happen to the Saturn system, or our solar system. This is remembered in folklore and perhaps the human consciousness as doomsday, the sky falling on our heads. During this event, either the planets changed their order and orbits, or Earth left Saturn's electromagnetic environment. After the planet gods fighting each other with cosmic thunderbolts, wars, takeovers, etc., our solar system eventually settled down into the calm that we have known for perhaps the last 1,000 or 2,000 years. Which is why the incredible tales of cosmic chaos, worlds in collision, makes no sense to us. The Saturn Theory, also called the Saturn Model, is the idea based on comparative mythology that the Earth was once in closer proximity, or even a satellite of the planet Saturn, which appeared like a sun. Several authors have independently suggested that mythological sources and ancient texts lead to the conclusion that the Earth was once a moon of the planet Saturn. According to the Saturn polar configuration theory, not more than 6,000 years ago, our ancestors lived in a very different world, with the heavens in a different configuration than today. The planets were not far away from the Earth, but overhead, in conjunction above the North Pole. These planets were Saturn, Venus, and Mars. Saturn was the primary orb, and was originally not a planet, but a sub-brown dwarf star. The theory further posits that the neighboring planets only recently settled into their current orbits, the Earth formerly being involved in a unique planetary configuration of sorts, together with Saturn, Venus, and Mars. As the terrestrial skywatcher looks upwards, he saw a spectacular and awe-inspiring apparition dominating the celestial landscape. At the heart of heaven, the massive gas giant Saturn appeared fixed atop the North Pole axis, with Venus and Mars set within its center, like two concentric orbs. The theory holds that the origin of ancient myth and religion, indeed the origin of the primary institutions of civilization itself, is inextricably linked to the appearance and evolutionary history of this unique congregation of planets. So, to kind of tie all of this Saturn stuff up, let's start by first agreeing that the mystery schools, all mythology, and many ancient texts from many different civilizations all seem to tell a story of the zodiac, the stars, the cosmos. Let's also agree that all of these sun deities from all of these different civilizations had a twin brother, usually a twin, including Jesus and Saturn. And there was some great catastrophe that they witnessed. And most astrologers and researchers agree that our solar system, just as all solar systems, was at one time binary, or had two suns.
And lastly, I'd like to point out that just as the age of Pisces is represented by the fisherman, Jesus, and goes from the year 1 to the present, and Aries goes from 2000 BC to the year 1 AD and represents the lamb or ram, and these animals are represented quite often during the writings of this time. Taurus, which stretches from approximately 4000 BC to 2000 BC, is represented by the bull, and we see this animal represented in many of the texts written during this time, like the worship of the golden calf, for instance. The time period from 6000 BC to 4000 BC, the time of which we believe to be the age of Kronos, the time of the legend of two suns, is represented by Gemini, or the twins. Now, how all this fits together, I do not know. But I have been told by those who have been initiated, and as have been initiated myself in the mystery schools, that Christ and Lucifer are one and the same. However, I cannot bring myself to believe that. What you believe, of course, is your own business, and is not my intention to make you believe anything, but rather it's to impart to you what I have learned over many, many years of study
into the secrets of those who worship the ancient mystery religions in secret for thousands of years.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for watching this presentation. Please watch for the next segment of our Mystery Babylon series on this channel. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe in order to spread this information as much as possible. Thank you.